Tanya stood in the bright lobby of the downtown art gallery, her heart racing. She had always loved this place. The high ceilings, the shiny floors, and the smell of fresh paint filled her with hope and inspiration. Tonight was the opening night of a major exhibit, and she was excited to be there, surrounded by artists and art lovers alike. But one woman in particular stood out among the crowd. Susan, a well-known critic, hovered near the entrance like a hawk, her sharp gaze assessing everything and everyone. Tanya could feel the tension when she approached Susan's small group. They laughed and chatted, but Susan's smile felt cold. Tanya simply wanted to say hi, to share her excitement for the exhibit. But how could she do that when Susan seemed to thrive on power? "Look at that piece over there," Susan said loudly, pointing to an artwork that hung adjacent to them. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Tanya glanced at the piece. A simple canvas splashed with colors that were chaotic yet strangely beautiful. The artist and up-and-coming talent had poured her heart into that work. Tanya felt a pang of anger rise in her chest. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, not judgment. Taking a deep breath, Tanya stepped up to Susan and her friends. "Hi Susan, I'm really excited about this exhibit." Susan's eyes narrowed. Tanya's heart pounded louder in her ears. She felt small, an ant before a giant, but she couldn't back down now. She had worked too hard to let this moment slip away. "It's not a mess," Tanya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Art can be chaotic and still be beautiful." Susan laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the crowd. "Connection, sweetheart, don't you realize that art is about skill?" The group around them looked uncomfortable, glancing back and forth between Tanya and Susan. Tanya felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Art doesn't have to fit a mold. For a moment, Susan appeared taken aback. Perhaps she didn't expect someone to challenge her. "You know, if you keep talking like that, I might just have to call security," she said, her smile returning, but this time it felt sinister. Tanya's breath caught in her throat. She had crossed a line, and Susan was ready to use her power. It felt as though the whole room shrank around them. The laughter faded, and all eyes were on the two women. No one spoke, and yet everyone was listening. Just then, a strong presence filled the space. The gallery director, Mark, known for his kindness and open mind, walked over. He had always been a champion for new voices and talents, and Tanya's heart jumped at the sight of him. Mark asked, his tone calm but firm. Susan turned her attention away from Tanya, pushing her hair behind her ear as if preparing to drop a bomb. Tanya was just expressing some rather unconventional opinions about this exhibit, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I was simply reminding her of the standards we uphold here. Mark glanced at Tanya, and she could see the understanding in his eyes. He had seen many artists face similar challenges, often from critics like Susan who wielded their opinions like swords. I appreciate your passion, Tanya, Mark said, addressing her directly, but I also want to remind everyone that this gallery is a place for everyone. Susan's expression flashed with irritation. Mark maintained his composure. It's not about sides, Susan. It's about respect and fostering an environment where creativity can thrive. The crowd began to murmur softly. Tanya felt propelled by a wave of hope. Mark had chosen to stand up not just for her, but for everyone who stepped into the gallery looking for a voice. Susan scoffed. So what? Mark took a step closer to Susan, and Tanya could feel the tension rise again. Art isn't about nonsense, Susan. It's about the dialogue it creates. Tanya had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. Mark wasn't backing down. It was invigorating to see someone stand up to the critic that had cast a shadow over so many. Listen, Tanya said suddenly, surprising even herself with her boldness. I'm not here to cause trouble or prove anyone wrong. I just want to express my love for something that inspires me. Susan's eyes darkened. She took a step toward Tanya, her voice lowering to a whisper that still carried weight. Tanya felt a small tremor run through her. What would it mean for her career if Susan turned against her? But at that moment, something shifted inside her. And just about tonight, it was about a journey she had fought hard to be part of. Art isn't a competition, Susan, Tanya said, her voice stronger now. Mark nodded in agreement, bringing weight to her words. Art is a mirror reflecting our lives, struggles, dreams, and sometimes even our fears. We can either let it lift us or bring us down. The crowd buzzed with energy, and Tanya felt strength swell within her. She could stand up to Susan, just like she had stood up for her art. Susan's gaze turned icy, her smile faltering just slightly. You think this makes you strong? Just remember, the world of art and critics is a small one. But it's our voices that ignite change. Tanya shot back, her pulse racing as she realized she no longer needed to be afraid. Just then, another group of artists nearby began to clap softly, then louder, until the sound filled the room. Mark smiled, and the energy shifted. Here's what I think, he said, raising his hands to quiet the applause. Let's celebrate the diversity of art and the courage it takes to express ourselves. Tanya could hardly breathe as the tension seemed to dissolve, a palpable change sweeping through the gallery. Susan's expression hardened, but there was a glimmer of uncertainty, a crack in her armor. Fine, she said, finally stepping back, crossing her arms. With that, she turned on her heel, making her way back toward the entrance, likely to gather her things or perhaps to find a more vulnerable target. Once she was gone, Tanya felt the weight lift instantly. The crowd erupted in celebration, people congratulating her on her bravery, her unwavering spirit. A few artists approached, sharing their own stories of fear and courage in the face of criticism. Mark stood beside her, beaming with pride. "You did well, Tanya." Sometimes it takes a little light to chase away the dark. Tanya felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I didn't want to back down." "It's more than important," Mark said gently. "It's essential. Art is never just art, it's a commentary, a connection." As the night went on, Tanya lost herself in conversations with fellow artists, her spirit buoyed by the warmth of support and connection. She had faced a moment that could have silenced her, but instead it turned into a powerful night of expression and community. No longer would Susan's words hold sway over her. She had discovered her voice, and it was beautiful. Even as she looked around at the stunning displays of creativity that adorned the gallery walls, she knew one thing: she belonged, and that realization was worth fighting for. The moment Tanya walked into the packed art gallery, she felt a strange buzz in the air, like the tension right before a storm. It was the opening night of a highly anticipated exhibit filled with creativity and passion. Everyone was there, artists, critics, and enthusiasts alike, mingling in their finest clothes, sipping on wine, and lost in each other's conversations. But at that very moment, one person seemed to cast a shadow over the evening, the infamous art critic, Susan. Tanya glanced around, her heart thudding. Susan was standing near the entrance, arms crossed, her piercing eyes scanning the crowds. She held a glass of red wine in one hand, but it was her sharp tongue that was far more dangerous. The wine felt more like a weapon than a drink tonight. As Tanya stepped deeper into the room, she caught snippets of Susan's sarcastic musings. "Look at that," Susan said, pointing to a bold, abstract piece. "Chaos isn't art, just chaos." The gathering crowd laughed lightly, unsure if they were laughing at the art or at her biting remarks. Tanya clutched her own piece, a small, vibrant canvas that depicted the heartbreak of lost love. It was raw and real, a labor of love that she had poured hours into. But now, standing in front of Susan, all that confidence felt shaky. Deciding she wouldn't let Susan's negativity drown her spirit, Tanya gathered her courage and walked up to the critic. "Hi, Susan," she said, her voice steady. Susan turned her icy gaze toward her, assessing Tanya like a pawn on a chessboard. "Is that so?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, but Tanya refused to be intimidated. "I think every artist's voice matters," Tanya replied, forcing a smile. Susan laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut through the crowd. "You think being sentimental is enough to make art valuable?" Tanya felt her heart race, a mixture of anger and vulnerability. She had heard about Susan's reputation for ruthless criticism, but this was different. Now it was personal. The tension wrapped around them like a thick fog, and she could feel the eyes of the crowd shifting from one woman to the other. Before Tanya could respond, Susan leaned closer, her expression darkening. "If you keep talking like this, I'll have to call security." Tanya's stomach dropped. The threat hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down like a challenge. Call security. It felt like a bomb had gone off. Experienced designers in the art world knew Susan had the power to crush careers with just a few words. But just when Tanya thought the air around her would grow icy, she caught sight of Mark, the gallery director, stepping through the throng of people, radiating warmth and charisma. He had always believed in Tanya, had always championed the voices of the unheard. Mark asked, his calm demeanor cutting through the rising tension like a knife. Susan straightened up, her chin high. "Tanya here thinks she has something valuable to contribute to the conversation on art," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I was just reminding her about the standards we uphold." Mark's gaze shifted to Tanya, seeing the raw emotion in her eyes, and then back to Susan. "Art is about exploration and expression, Susan." Susan said, her voice rising slightly, her confidence beginning to crack. Mark didn't flinch. "This gallery is about providing a platform for everyone, even those whose opinions clash with yours." Tanya felt a rush of relief wash over her. Mark was on her side. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The trembling fear began to transform into a quiet courage. She realized she had every right to stand here, not just for herself, but for the countless artists who had been silenced before her. "Art isn't a competition," Tanya said, her voice steadying as she found her rhythm. "It's a conversation. It should bring people together, not tear them apart." Susan's gaze hardened, and for a split second, Tanya felt the palpable weight of the critic's disdain. "Listen here, young lady," she hissed, her tone a desperate attempt to regain control over the situation. "Just because you have feelings doesn't make your work important." But before Tanya could respond, applause erupted from a group nearby. Artists who had gathered to witness the showdown began clapping, their cheers growing louder. The room vibrated with energy as more people began to join in. Mark beamed, his eyes shining with pride. "See, this is what I'm talking about." Susan crossed her arms, grasping onto her dignity like a life raft. The applause faded, but the weight of her words lingered. Tanya felt the adrenaline rush through her veins. She had ignited something powerful, something she never knew could happen in a moment of confrontation. Susan took a deep breath, unwilling to show any sign of defeat. You may have everyone cheering today, but don't forget the art world is a small place, she said, her voice a whisper but dripping with menace. Tanya met her gaze directly, refusing to be cowed. But power doesn't mean everything, she said, her courage rising like a tide. It's about sparking connection and inspiration. The crowd was still buzzing with chatter, the energy electric and almost contagious. Tanya's spirit soared as she glanced around at the other artists, their faces lit with encouragement. They had all faced obstacles, and this moment resonated with them. Mark stepped closer to Tanya. What you did today was remarkable. Never let anyone take away your voice. Jess, a fellow artist and friend, joined them, her eyes sparkling. Tanya, that was brilliant. Tanya felt herself glow with pride and relief. Those words filled her with strength she didn't know she had. It was a reminder that art is about truth, not just the approval of a select few. Meanwhile, Susan huffed in frustration, her facade cracking. She turned on her heel, clutching her wine glass tightly and making her way to the exit, muttering under her breath. As she walked away, the room seemed to exhale collectively, an atmosphere of release and relief washing over everyone. As the evening continued, Tanya found herself surrounded by warmth and camaraderie. Conversations flowed freely, people sharing their stories, their struggles, and most importantly, their art. The gallery felt alive, a pulsating heart filled with passion and creativity. Mark lingered nearby, speaking with others, the weight of the night shifting from tension to celebration. Tanya felt a new purpose igniting within her. She began to mingle, her confidence growing with each interaction. As she spoke to others, sharing her journey as an artist, she realized that this night was more than just an exhibit. It was a moment of empowerment. In the midst of the laughter and sharing, Tanya noticed a small group of emerging artists huddled together, talking quietly. Their expressions hinted at fear, skepticism, and inadequacy. Pausing at their side, she thought back to the way she had felt when facing Susan's harsh words. As the surprise of the night unfolded around her, something deep inside urged her to connect with these artists. She gathered her thoughts and took a leap of faith. She asked, her voice open and inviting. One artist, a shy young woman named Mia, nodded hesitantly. I do, but I'm really nervous about what people will think. Tanya smiled warmly, feeling a kinship with her hesitation. I understand completely. I just had a tense moment with a critic who didn't like my work, and it was nerve-wracking. But that's the beauty of art, isn't it? Mia looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Tanya laughed lightly, feeling the truth of the moment. And you know what? It felt amazing. Remember, your art comes from your heart. That's what makes it special. The other artists nodded, their expressions shifting from doubt to empowerment. The electricity in the room surged once more. Tanya realized the power of their collective voices. They were part of something bigger than themselves, a movement driven by passion and shared experiences. As the night continued, the gallery echoed with laughter and chatter, the weight of Susan's threats replaced by a newfound energy, a celebration that art brings even amidst criticism. Tanya took a deep breath, the intoxicating scent of fresh paint in the air, and smiled. Each piece of art told a story, a journey demanding to be told, and as her own journey started to unfurl, she knew this was just the beginning. In that moment, the fear dissipated, replaced by an unshakable conviction. Art was not merely subjective, it was powerful, a connection that needed to be shared and celebrated, and that was something worth fighting for. The moment Tanya entered the bustling art gallery, a wave of energy enveloped her, a vibrant mix of voices, laughter, and clinking glasses echoing through the high-ceilinged space. Tonight was the opening of a major exhibit, and the walls were adorned with breathtaking pieces, each telling its own story, each imbued with the artist's spirit. But standing near the entrance was a figure that sent a shiver down Tanya's spine, Susan, the notorious art critic. Susan possessed a formidable presence, one that seemed to dwarf the room. Her piercing gaze scanned the crowd, looking for imperfections, for flaws. Tanya clutched her own artwork, a canvas soaked in emotion, reflecting her journey through heartbreak. She had worked tirelessly on it, hoping to connect with others, hoping it would speak volumes. Yet Susan's presence loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to rain on her parade. As the crowd chatted and mingled, Tanya took a deep breath, summoning her courage. She had heard countless stories about Susan, how her biting critique could shake even the most seasoned artists to their core. But Tanya craved acceptance, a chance to share her work, and she knew it wouldn't come from hiding in the shadows. Jess called from across the room, waving her over. Tanya managed to smile, grateful for the familiar face, but as she approached, she could feel Susan's eyes on her, assessing and analyzing. Susan's been at it all night, Jess said, glancing back at the critic. I overheard her saying the pieces are lacking depth. Tanya nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. The stakes felt higher tonight. She had come to share her art, but the thought of facing Susan made her second-guess everything. Just then, Susan strode over, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a judge's gavel. Well, if it isn't the artist with the big dreams, she said, looking down her nose at Tanya. Tanya felt her heart race. I'm here to share my art, she responded, trying to keep her voice steady. Art speaks, but only if it has something meaningful to say, Susan shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. You know, if your piece lacks truth, I could easily call security to escort you out. The crowd began to quiet, curiosity piqued as people turned to watch the altercation unfold. Tanya felt a flush of embarrassment as the color rose in her cheeks. How had a simple opening night turned into a battleground? Art isn't about being perfect, it's about expression, Tanya retorted, her pulse quickening, her breath shaky but defiant. For a moment, Susan stared at her, eyes narrowing. It was at that moment Tanya realized she had touched a nerve. Critics like Susan thrived on power, on the ability to dictate who mattered in the art world. But what if Tanya stood her ground? Suddenly, Mark, the gallery director, stepped into view. He moved through the crowd like a beacon of hope, an anchor of positivity amidst the brewing storm. He asked, his voice calm yet authoritative. Susan opened her mouth, likely to deliver a cutting remark, but Mark held up a hand to stop her. You know, Susan, he said, this gallery is about embracing all forms of creativity. Tanya felt a rush of gratitude wash over her as Mark defended her. She had always admired him for his open heart and genuine belief in art as a vehicle for expression. Art should spark conversation, not intimidation, Mark continued, his gaze traveling from Susan to Tanya. Every artist brings something unique to the table. The crowd seemed to breathe in unison, tension easing slightly. The applause began small at first, then swelling into a wave of sound that filled the room. Tanya's spirit soared. Could this be her moment? But Susan's frustration was palpable, her mask of control slipping. You're making a mistake, Mark, she hissed. This isn't about coddling those who think they're artists. Integrity means allowing everyone to express themselves, Mark replied firmly. But Susan would not back down. She said, her voice rising, containing a dare. The room grew quiet, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Tanya felt a surge of emotion, a fire igniting inside her. She had spent too long worrying about criticism and not enough time believing in her own voice. This art speaks to me, Susan, Tanya declared, her voice strong. It tells a story of love and loss, of growth and pain. You might not see value in it, but many others will. For the first time, Susan hesitated, her confidence wavering. She echoed, her tone sharper than before. Art isn't meant to be confined by logic. It's about evoking feelings, connections, Tanya pressed on, drawing strength from the crowd's supportive energy. Mark nodded, pride lighting up his eyes. Exactly, Tanya. This is what we stand for. Susan's agitation became tangible. She looked around as if searching for an ally. The gathered crowd began to murmur, the atmosphere shifting from apprehension to solidarity. It was becoming clear Tanya's voice mattered. Fine, Susan finally spat, her demeanor furious yet desperate to maintain some semblance of authority. You've made your point, but don't think this is over. With that, she spun on her heels, storming away from the crowd, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with a mix of empowerment and disbelief. Tanya stood tall, breathing in the warmth of support radiating from those around her. The night continued, and Tanya felt lighter as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The room buzzed with conversations, an air of camaraderie blossoming. Fellow artists approached her, enthusiasm gleaming in their eyes. Jess exclaimed, her voice bubbling with admiration. You really stood your ground, Tanya grinned, a sense of elation enveloping her. I didn't want to back down. Emboldened by the applause, Tanya ventured around the gallery, engaging with anyone who wanted to talk. Brad, a sculptor with a wild imagination, shared stories of his own struggles against critique and rejection. They spoke long into the night, laughter bubbling up as they swapped ideas, philosophies, and experiences. Tanya realized that this was what art was all about, the community, the connection, the undeniable bond forged through shared experiences. But even amidst the joy, there was still a small knot of anxiety lingering in her chest. Susan's words had stung, and the thought that she might come back to wreak havoc on the exhibit was a worry that threatened to overshadow her excitement. As long as I stay true to my vision, nothing will overshadow this moment, Tanya whispered to herself, feeling a surge of determination. As the evening quieted down and the gathering began to thin, the gallery director approached Tanya again, his eyes filled with admiration. What you did tonight was incredibly brave, Tanya. Thank you, Mark. I think I just realized that if we don't fight for our voices, we might lose them, she replied, her heart racing. And your voice matters, he said, not just tonight, but in every piece you create. Don't let anyone critic or not take that away from you. Tanya felt a flush of gratitude. In that moment, everything clicked. Art was about authenticity, not approval. It was about connecting with others, sparking emotions, and sharing stories that need to be told. Hours passed, and as the night wound down, Tanya stood back and admired her piece, the colors swirling, the shapes telling stories of pain and hope. It was a part of her, a reflection of her journey, and she felt proud. Suddenly, Mark leaned closer. You know, Tanya, I think your work touches people in ways more profound than we often acknowledge. Tanya's heart raced at the thought. Art as a catalyst for transformation. It made sense. She had already felt it tonight, seeing how her voice resonated in a space that could easily stifle the timid. As the final guests filtered out, Tanya felt a sense of triumph wash over her. Susan's empty words felt distant now, overwhelming, replaced by the power of support and the celebration of creativity. She had faced fear head-on and stood her ground. The gallery buzzed with energy, the remnants of the night whispering stories long after the crowd had dispersed. Tanya looked around at the walls again, their colors alive with narratives yearning to be shared. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she had learned that moments of confrontation could lead to profound empowerment. And as they stamped her signature on that canvas, she knew one thing for certain: she was more than just an artist. She was a storyteller, a voice ready to make an impact, ready to dance freely in the world of art, and the adventure had only just begun. The gallery was alive with laughter, chatter, and the soft clinking of glasses, the scent of fresh paint mixing with expensive wine. Tonight was the big night. Her art was finally being displayed. The vibrant colors of her painting called out, each stroke reflecting her journey of heartbreak and growth. She had poured everything into this piece, and she was ready to share it with the world. But in the corner of the room stood Susan, the infamous art critic whose reputation for ruthless judgment sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned artists. Her gaze was sharp, cutting through the crowd like a knife. Tanya's heart sank as she spotted her, the air thickening with tension. Michelle, a fellow artist, leaned closer, whispering, "Watch out for her." Tanya took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease. This moment was supposed to be about celebration, not fear. She admired her painting once more, wanting to give it the attention it deserved. It was courageous and raw, a true representation of her feelings. As the crowd shifted and moved, Tanya's resolve began to waver. Would Susan's words cut her down before she even had a chance to shine? She felt a pull from her core, a mix of anxiety and determination. She couldn't let fear dictate her night. Suddenly, Susan strode over, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. Tanya's stomach tightened. "Ah, the artist of the evening," Susan said, her voice smooth but laced with sarcasm. "I see you're here to delight us with." Tanya's heart pounded. "It's called breaking free," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. Susan raised an eyebrow, a sly grin spreading across her face. "Empowerment, you say? Tell me, do you believe that throwing random colors on canvas tells a story?" The laughter of the crowd faded, and the weight of Susan's words pressed down on Tanya. Pain hit her chest. She had put so much passion into her work. How could anyone dismiss it as chaos? "It's not chaos," Tanya replied, her voice rallying as she fought to keep composure. "Art is a reflection of emotion. Chaos can tell a story just as clearly as ordered lines." Susan scoffed, glancing around. "You think that your little painting is going to inspire anyone? This isn't a therapy session, Tanya. This is a gallery." The tension in the air heightened. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. The crowd had become a stage, and Tanya was at its center. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but beneath the discomfort, anger began to simmer. How dare Susan belittle her art? "I understand that art is subjective," Tanya said, forcing herself to remain calm. "But everyone has a right to express themselves." For a moment, Susan looked taken aback, her steely demeanor faltering. "You're brave, I'll give you that," she said slowly, her tone softening slightly. Just then Mark, the director of the gallery, arrived, his presence radiating warmth and authority. He asked, glancing between the two women, sensing the brewing storm. Tanya felt a surge of relief as he approached. "No problem," Susan replied, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice, just enlightening Tanya on the harsh realities of the art world. Mark looked at Tanya, then back at Susan. "This gallery embraces all interpretations of art, Susan. Art is meant to provoke thought and reflection, and it often comes from deeply personal experiences." Tanya's heart swelled with gratitude at Mark's support. She could feel the crowd leaning in closer, some nodding in agreement. This was beginning to feel like a turning point. The crowd shifted uneasily, and for a heartbeat, Tanya felt paralyzed. The threat lingered like a dark cloud over her. Would Susan really call security? But her anxiety soon morphed into defiance. "You can call security," she said, her voice steady. "But this is my truth, my story. No one can take that away from me. Art thrives on honesty." The gallery erupted in murmurs of support. Her heartbeat quickened at the realization that people were rooting for her. Mark smiled, sensing the change in energy. "Exactly, Tanya. Art isn't about pleasing critics. It's about connecting with others. It's about being real." Susan looked furious, a flash of frustration crossing her face. "This isn't about truth or connection," she shot back, her voice rising. "It's about standards. Real art requires technique, discipline, skill." "The truth is that art can come from anywhere," Tanya countered, her heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. "Sometimes the most profound work defies traditional standards. It captures raw emotion." Mark nodded, emboldened by Tanya's strength. "She's right. Art is evolving. It's a reflection of who we are at that moment." "You're turning this gallery into a circus," Susan hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. The tension crackled in the air, and the crowd watched in anticipation. Tanya felt a rush of resolve. How far could she push? She challenged. "Does that mean I don't belong here? You get to decide who stays and goes." Mark stepped forward. "We're not going to allow anyone to dictate who deserves a voice here, Susan." Finally, a wave of applause erupted from the crowd, their support igniting the room. The energy shifted, and the atmosphere transformed from tension to empowerment. Susan was visibly shaken, her facade cracking. "You're making a mistake," she bit out. Tanya felt a surge of adrenaline. I'm not afraid of you, Susan. Your power lies in criticism, but my power lies in my authenticity. For a moment, silence filled the space. It felt like time stood still, everyone processing the intensity of the moment. Susan glared at Tanya, her frustration tangible. Then, with a huff of indignation, she turned on her heel and stalked away, her heels echoing against the floor, a storm cloud departing. As cheers erupted from the crowd, Tanya felt herself breathing deeply, shock and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Jess exclaimed, rushing over. I couldn't let her push me around, Tanya said, still shaking. Mark approached, pride shining in his eyes. You handled that with grace and courage. Thanks, Tanya replied, a shy grin breaking through. The energy remained electric, with guests rushing to congratulate her. Each word of affirmation felt like fuel, igniting the newfound fire within her. As people engaged in enthusiastic conversations, Tanya soaked it all in, feeling the gratitude and admiration swirling around her. Hours passed, laughter and warmth replacing the earlier tension. Tanya navigated through the crowd, each conversation offering pieces of inspiration, encouragement, and revelation. Brad, the sculptor she had spoken to earlier, found her again. You were phenomenal, Tanya. Art takes courage, he said, his admiration evident. Thank you, she replied, feeling the weight of his words. He exclaimed, passion igniting in his voice. As the night wore on, Tanya felt a newfound sense of belonging. This room filled with creativity, fullness, and vulnerability was where she truly belonged. She had fought for her voice, and now it resonated in ways she had never imagined. Yet even with the triumph of the moment, she couldn't shake off the ghost of Susan's threat. Would she return? Would her words carry weight outside of this space? But then Jason, another artist, picked up on her lingering worry. Hey, don't let that thought consume you, he said, sensing her unease. Critics will always exist, but they don't define our worth. Tanya nodded, soaking in his words. You're right, this victory is mine, and no one can take that away. The room continued to buzz with enthusiasm, laughter intertwining with the remnants of bold discussions. As people shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs, Tanya realized she was part of something much larger than herself, a web of creativity binding them all together. As the night began to wind down, Tanya caught a glimpse of her painting one last time. It looked even more alive under the soft gallery lights, an emblem of courage, passion, and resilience. With every stroke, she felt the catharsis of having stood her ground. The energy of the crowd was palpable, their voices weaving around her, reminding her that tonight was not just about art. It was about connection, empowerment, and the courage to share one's truth. As the soft echoes of laughter lingered in the air and people began to say their goodbyes, Tanya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had learned a powerful lesson. The art world was about more than critics and approval. It was a community built on authenticity, vulnerability, and the willingness to stand up for oneself. And at that moment, as she embraced her fellow artists, she knew one thing without doubt. She had found her voice, and she was ready to wield it fearlessly in the future. This was just the beginning of her journey, one where her art would shine, her story would unfold, and her voice would echo on, long after the gallery doors had closed. The room was a swirl of lights and colors, laughter echoing like music as artists and critics mingled in the gallery. Tanya stood near her painting, her heart racing with anticipation. This wasn't just another exhibit, it was her moment to shine. She had poured her soul into this piece, each brushstroke a reflection of her journey through heartbreak and healing. But just as the excitement built, the air shifted. Across the room loomed Susan, the renowned art critic known for her sharp tongue and ruthless critiques. She stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd as though preparing to pounce on anyone who dared to present something she deemed unworthy. Tanya felt a chill creep up her spine, and she knew instinctively that Susan's presence could turn her night upside down. Michelle, a fellow artist, whispered as she leaned closer to Tanya. Tanya forced a smile. Yeah, just don't let her get to you, Michelle replied, her voice steady. Art is subjective. But as Tanya watched Susan's cold gaze lock onto her painting, doubt seeped into her mind. The vibrant colors that once felt empowering now seemed vulnerable under constant scrutiny. What would Susan think of her journey? Would she shoot it down like she had done to so many others? Suddenly, the gallery's atmosphere shifted. Susan strode over, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a judge's gavel. The crowd subtly parted, sensing the tension. She said, glancing at Tanya's work, her tone dripping with condescension. Tanya swallowed hard. Susan raised an eyebrow, scoffing. Empowerment, you think splattering paint randomly on a canvas qualifies as art? What's the story here? The laughter that followed cut through Tanya, sharp and unforgiving. Her heart raced, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. She could feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, their curiosity mixed with a nervous tension. The room constricted around her, and she felt like a fish caught in a net. No, it's not just a mess, Tanya managed to reply, her voice trembling but determined. Art reflects emotions and experiences. Susan shrugged, crossing her arms. Reality doesn't mean a thing if it's not executed with skill. Seems like you're blinded by your own sentimentality. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and outrage swirling within her. How could Susan wield her power like this? But just as the tension threatened to crush her, a familiar voice broke through the silence. Mark, the gallery director, emerged from the crowd, a strong figure whose presence brought a wave of calm. He radiated warmth, a stark contrast to Susan's icy demeanor. Tanya exhaled, grateful for the support. Susan was just enlightening her on what real art is, Susan interrupted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Mark's expression remained steady. What belongs in this gallery is a celebration of creativity. Tanya's work is bold and honest. Tanya felt a surge of hope. Mark always stood for the artists, believing in their voices. She glanced at the crowd, sensing their curiosity and support. The energy in the room shifted. Creativity isn't about fitting into a box, Mark continued. It's about exploration. Susan, taken aback, quickly regained her composure. That's one way to look at it, but if it's nothing but good intentions wrapped in a colorful mess, it won't last. Maybe mediocrity is in the eye of the beholder, Tanya shot back, her voice gaining strength. Art isn't just about technique, it's about expression. Susan narrowed her eyes, her anger palpable. The challenge hung in the air, a duel of wills. Tanya felt the tension thrum in her veins, her heart pounding fiercely, and she realized she wasn't alone. She had allies, and their presence lit a fire within her. Mark nodded, visibly proud of Tanya's courage. This gallery is about allowing voices to be heard, even dissenting ones. Susan huffed, clearly irked but unable to regain her footing. Next, you'll tell me we should all just throw paint around and call it art, she said, sarcasm woven into her words. Tanya replied, emboldened by Mark's support. Art evolves, and sometimes it's that spontaneous expression that reveals deeper truths. The crowd shifted, sensing the raw energy surging through the tension-filled atmosphere. More voices began to chime in, supporters rallying around Tanya's viewpoint. Shouted Brad, a nearby sculptor, lifting his glass in solidarity. It should evoke feelings, chimed in another voice. Barbara, another artist in the crowd, added, Tanya's work speaks to so many of us. Susan's expression twisted in contempt, her earlier confidence fading into frustration. This is ridiculous, she snapped. If you think this is a valuable exchange, you're all sorely mistaken. Mark stepped closer to Tanya, determination in his eyes. You know, Susan, your threats are starting to feel desperate. Real art doesn't aim to make enemies, it opens doors for dialogue. The passion in Tanya ignited, and she fueled that energy. I'm not afraid of you, Susan. You may hold the weight of critique, but my journey is mine, and no one can take that from me. If my art doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. For a moment, silence fell over the gallery. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Susan's response. But instead of firing back, she stared, and for the first time, her control crumbled. Fine, she said coldly, a flicker of vulnerability edging into her gaze. Tanya felt a rush of adrenaline. She had stood her ground. The moment shifted as the applause broke out, a ripple of solidarity washing over the room. The walls seemed to echo with applause, cheers of encouragement mingling in the air. Someone shouted from the crowd, and the energy surged. It felt like a celebration, a declaration of resilience, creativity, and community. Mark's smile widened as he turned to the crowd. This is what we need more of, conversations that challenge and inspire. Tanya felt herself swell with pride. Susan had come in with ice and disdain, but she had sparked something beautiful instead, a creative fire that ignited not just her own voice but those of many others. The gallery buzzed with energy, laughter flowing freely and conversations sparking all around. Tanya felt genuinely embraced in that moment. As she mingled, artists flocked to her, eager to share their own stories of vulnerability. Brad came by with a grin. You're a force, Tanya. The warmth of the support filled her heart. Art is about connection, she replied, feeling her confidence rise. As the evening unfolded, Tanya shared her journey with anyone who would listen, each story resonating with her own. The connection was palpable, a web of creativity binding them all together. But even in this joyous atmosphere, the shadow of Susan lurked in the back of her mind. Would she return with greater fury? Tanya pushed the thought aside. Tonight was about celebrating their voices, not fearing criticism. Hours passed, and the gallery continued to echo with excitement. Tanya took in her painting one last time, the vibrant colors glowing against the soft gallery lights. This wasn't just a symbol of her struggles, it was a testament to her resilience. Suddenly, Mark approached her, a glint of admiration in his eyes. What you did tonight was fearless. Thank you, Mark, Tanya responded, heart swelling with gratitude. It felt like I had to, you know. Exactly, he said firmly. Art is about making an impact. Those who are true to their vision can inspire so many. The applause returned, resonating through the room as people celebrated the shared sense of empowerment. Tanya's heart danced with joy, and she realized how far she had come. The gallery began to empty, but Tanya felt a fresh sense of purpose settle in her chest. Each artist who hugged her or congratulated her added another layer of strength to her resolve. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the last guests said their goodbyes, Tanya stood in the now quiet gallery, absorbing the energy of everything that had happened. She had come here to share her art and had left with something much greater, a renewed sense of self, a fierce community around her. and the knowledge that vulnerability can be a powerful catalyst for change. In that moment, she understood that art was about more than just aesthetics. It was about conversations, connections, and courage. And as she exited the gallery, Tanya knew this night was just the beginning of her journey, a journey where her voice would always be heard, celebrated, and cherished. With each step away from the gallery, Tanya felt the weight of fear fade, replaced instead with unstoppable confidence. She was ready to face whatever came next. After all, she had found her voice, and it was stronger than ever. The world awaited her story, and she was more than ready to share it. The moment Tanya walked into the gallery, she felt a rush of excitement mixed with a hint of anxiety. Opening night was chaotic but exhilarating. Vibrant colors splashed across canvases surrounded her, each piece telling a different story. She was nervous but ready. Tonight her art was front and center, the culmination of months of hard work, late nights, and emotional storms. But as she made her way through the buzzing crowd, her heart sank. There, looming near the entrance, was Susan, the notorious art critic known for her biting reviews and icy demeanor. Tanya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Rumors flew about how she could make or break careers with a single word, and Tanya felt as if the air was sucked from the room. "Look at that one," Susan said, her voice sharp as she pointed, coldly judging another artist's work. Tanya's palms grew clammy as she considered how easily Susan could dismantle her own piece. All her hopes felt precarious, like glass teetering on the edge of a table. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was here, to share her story. Michelle, a fellow artist, asked, trying to lift Tanya's spirits. "Oh, I saw it," Susan replied, her tone laced with disdain. "Art is supposed to evoke emotions, not just be splashes of color. She'll learn or she won't," Susan added dismissively. The vibrant colors leaped from the canvas, swirling together like a chaotic dance. It spoke to her struggles, her journey through heartache, and finding her voice again. But would it speak to anyone else? As guests mingled, Tanya felt a mix of pride and fear. Suddenly, she spotted Susan advancing toward her, her expression a blend of curiosity and condescension. Tanya braced herself, Susan asked, gesturing to the painting. Tanya swallowed hard, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, it is. I created it during a challenging time in my life." "I see," Susan said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And who do you expect to connect with this chaos?" Tanya felt her heart racing. This was more than just an attack on her art, it felt personal. "Art is subjective," she replied, her voice trembling but determined. Susan leaned in closer, her smile twisted. "You have a lot to learn. If you keep talking like that, I might have to call security." Gasps rippled through the crowd, the tension palpable. Tanya felt like she was trapped in a spotlight, exposed and vulnerable. Just as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, the familiar voice of Mark, the gallery director, broke through the tension. Mark asked, moving through the crowd with a calm authority that instantly soothing Tanya's nerves. Susan straightened up, quickly putting on her brilliant, cold persona before responding. "Oh, Mark, I was just trying to encourage Tanya to understand the reality of the art world." Mark turned his gaze to Tanya, and she could see understanding in his eyes. "Tanya, you know that art is meant to evoke emotion, regardless of technique." Feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her, Tanya took a breath. "I just want to share my story," she said, more confidently now. "Art is about vulnerability." Susan crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Vulnerability doesn't give you an excuse to create a mess. You need skill, you need depth." The room became electric with tension, a standoff filled with defiance and unease. Tanya felt the eyes of the crowd shift, gauging Susan's power and Tanya's growing resolve. "You may have the power to critique," Tanya said slowly, her voice gaining volume, "but my truth is my own. This piece speaks to me and I believe to others who have felt trapped by life's challenges." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "Exactly, Tanya. This gallery represents all voices." Susan's expression twisted in frustration, unable to comprehend that her biting words could be met with such resilience. "You're mistaken if you think this will end well for you," she hissed, her mask of authority faltering. "Maybe it's time for change," Tanya countered. "Art is about evolution, not just perfection." The words settled in the air and a wave of applause erupted from the crowd. Tanya realized that she wasn't just facing Susan, she was standing shoulder to shoulder with everyone who had been criticized, silenced, or overlooked. Mark beamed with pride as the applause grew, bolstering Tanya's confidence. "This is what we strive for in this gallery, to create a space for expression, not suppression. We support artists like Tanya because they bring light into the darkness," he said, voice steady and strong. "I'll make my presence felt in this gallery," Susan snapped back, frustration bubbling beneath her composure. Tanya stood tall, no longer shying away from the confrontation. "You can threaten me all you want, Susan, but I refuse to let fear dictate my art or my voice." Mark stepped forward with an air of resolution. "We are not afraid of your opinions, Susan." For the first time, Susan hesitated. The energy of the room shifted as everyone felt the weight of defiance coalesce against her. Finally unable to maintain her facade, Susan turned sharply on her heel, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor as she stormed out of the gallery, leaving behind a stunned crowd. A heaviness lifted, and for the first time that night, Tanya felt a sense of freedom fill the room. As applause erupted again, Tanya stood in disbelief. She had braced herself for the worst, but instead had found strength. The voices of support surrounded her, reminding her she wasn't alone in this battle. Jess exclaimed, rushing over to Tanya, beaming. "You were incredible. I couldn't let her take that away from me," Tanya said, still aflame with adrenaline. Mark approached again, clapping her on the shoulder. "What you did tonight was remarkable." As the crowd swelled with chatter, artists shared their own stories of defiance and struggle. Each story sparked a flame of camaraderie, igniting connections that pushed them all to reflect on the honest power of vulnerability. "Part of what makes art important is the connection it creates," Brad said, joining the group. "People like Susan forget that." "Exactly," Tanya echoed, her heart swelling with warmth. "It's not just about the piece itself, it's about the stories behind it." As conversation flowed, Tanya felt both relieved and empowered. The weight of Susan's earlier threats began to dissipate, replaced instead with the support of her community. Hours mingled into moments of laughter, storytelling, and shared vulnerability. It was as if the gallery had transformed from a battleground into a sanctuary, a safe space to explore the depths of each artist's journey through the heartfelt expressions hanging on the walls. Still in the back of Tanya's mind loomed the reality of Susan's words. What if she returned with a vendetta? Before she could spiral back into uncertainty, Mark leaned closer, sensing her concern. "Don't let fear control your narrative," he said gently. "You've earned your place here, Tanya. No one can take that from you unless you allow it." She nodded, the reassurance settling deep within her. There would always be critics, but every artist must forge their own path. What truly mattered was the journey, and she was finally ready to embrace it. As the evening wound down, Tanya looked one last time at her painting, colors shimmering in the gallery lights. It was proof of her resilience and authenticity. This was her voice, and she refused to let anyone drown it out. With the final guests departing, Tanya felt a surge of purpose flow through her. She had faced fear and emerged stronger, anchored in her own truth. She had found a community of fellow artists, each shaping the world in their unique way. The gallery buzzed with potential, the air thick with inspiration. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Tanya knew she could face them. She had confronted a powerful critic and found truth and support in her community. As she left the gallery, Tanya breathed in the crisp night air, a sense of illumination washing over her. She had learned a powerful lesson. Art was not merely about aesthetic appeal or technical skill. It was a bridge connecting people and emotions. That night she left knowing her story would always be part of an ongoing journey, one where she could add her voice to the powerful chorus of creativity unfolding around her. And each step she took forward was a reminder that she had the strength to be heard, to explore her truth, and to forge a path into the world of art with confidence. This was the beginning a spark ignited, a fire that would continue to blaze bright, and a story about resilience and authenticity. And with that, every heartbeat echoed one clear truth. She was ready to embrace the vibrant palette of life and unleash her voice upon the world. The gallery was buzzing, lights sparkling like stars above a sea of vibrant colors. Tanya stood among a crowd of artists and art lovers, her heart racing with a mix of hope and anxiety. It was the opening night of the exhibit, showcasing her latest piece, a journey through loss, longing, and ultimately rebellion. She could feel the warmth of excitement surrounding her, but anxiety clutched at her heart like a vice. A well-known art critic, Susan, had arrived. Tanya felt a chill. Susan had a reputation for turning even the most ardent supporters of art into silent shadows, making anyone who dared to challenge her expertise feel small. The thought of her potentially dissecting Tanya's work left a sour taste in her mouth. Tanya drew in a deep breath and stepped back, eyes drifting to her painting. It was a wild explosion of colors. The reds, blues, and yellows spun together in a way that mirrored her emotions, chaotic yet oddly beautiful. It represented her breaking free from the confines of her past, a piece of her soul laid bare for all to see. "Look at this one," Susan's voice sliced through the air, icy and dismissive as she approached Tanya's work. What a brilliant display of. Tanya's heart raced. She debated whether to confront Susan head-on or take a step back. Susan had a knack for making artists second-guess their worth with just a few well-placed words. As Susan inspected the painting, Tanya felt as if the eyes of the entire gallery were boring into her. Susan asked, eyes narrowed and expectant, as if daring Tanya to offer something profound. Tanya hesitated, feeling a surge of anger mixed with her fear. "It's not just paint thrown around, it's a representation of my struggles, my freedom." Susan scoffed. "You think breaking free means splattering colors on a canvas? What kind of message is that? What are you trying to express here?" Tanya held her breath, trying to stave off the flush creeping up her cheeks. A small crowd had begun to form, drawn by the escalating confrontation. Tanya could feel their eyes, some curious, others uneasy. "This piece is meant to reflect a personal journey," Tanya continued, her voice stronger this time. "We all have our struggles. This is mine, captured through art. You may not understand it, but art isn't just meant to be pretty." Susan rolled her eyes, dismissing Tanya's thoughts with a wave of her hand. "If that's how you want to justify this mess, fine." Don't expect applause when you offer nothing more than sentiment. The room went silent, the pressure thickening around Tanya. Panic rushed in like a tidal wave. Here she was, bearing a piece of her heart and being told it wasn't worthy. The thought of Susan actually calling security made her stomach drop. Tanya finally managed to say, her voice steadied by a new resilience. "I can assure you," Susan shot back, her eyes glimmering dangerously, "my opinion holds significant weight in this industry." Tanya felt the anger blazing inside her. It ignited a fire that replaced fear. Lucky to be belittled. Just then Mark, the gallery director, appeared in the crowd, a calm and confident presence cutting through the tension. He asked, his voice steady and warm. Susan, clearly caught off guard, straightened her posture. "I was merely engaging with this artist about her piece," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tanya took a breath, feeling a wave of relief. Mark always stood up for the artists and believed in their journeys. "I think it's important for artists to be able to express themselves without intimidation," he said, turning to Susan. "This gallery is a safe space for creativity, not a battleground for ego." With Mark's simple prompt, Tanya felt the last vestiges of her fear crumble away. She took a step forward, all eyes on her. "This painting talks about the intersection of pain and freedom. It's about not being afraid to show your true self." Mark nodded in agreement, encouraging her with a warm smile. "Exactly." Susan's annoyance bubbled over, her confidence slipping. She snapped, her tone colder. "What you're promoting here is mediocrity. Anyone can throw paint on a canvas." "If you think that's all art is, then perhaps you're the one missing the point," Tanya replied, feeling invigorated. "Real art taps into emotion, connects people and brings them together." Mark stepped closer. "And Tanya's piece has already made an impact tonight, whether you acknowledge it or not," he said, his tone steady and authoritative. "This is what we want to celebrate." Susan glared at Mark, as if assessing whether she could truly challenge his authority. "You know I can make or break careers with a simple review," she said, her voice a poison-laced whisper. Mark challenged, taking a step closer to Susan. "Art isn't meant to be controlled or dictated." As the tension reached its peak, Tanya stood tall, emboldened by the convergence of voices supporting her. "We all face scrutiny," she said, addressing Susan directly, "but that doesn't give anyone the right to belittle others." The crowd began to stir, whispers of agreement flowing through the air. Tanya felt a rush of warmth and validation as the room rallied behind her. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't falter. Susan's icy demeanor was beginning to crack. Finally, she pursed her lips, frustration pooling in her eyes. "Fine, I'll be leaving," Susan said, her voice barely above a hiss. "But rest assured, the art world doesn't forget." And with a flick of her hair, she turned and stormed away, her heels echoing against the floor as she exited the gallery, leaving behind a stunned silence. Applause erupted in the room, echoing off the walls as the crowd began to celebrate. Relief surged through Tanya, a powerful wave that swept away the remnants of doubt and fear. Mark smiled, clapping his hands together. Tonight is a testament to courage. As more applause filled the gallery, Tanya felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes. She had stood her ground, defied her fears, and in the process, inspired others to do the same. Jess called, rushing over. "You were incredible. I just couldn't stand there while she belittled my art," Tanya replied, her laughter blending with the cheers around her. Brad joined them, clearly brimming with energy. "You ignited something powerful tonight. You showed everyone that we can speak up." The excitement in the room became a buoyant tapestry of voices and laughter. Tanya felt the warmth embrace her, a community of artists who understood her journey and valued authenticity over critique. Hours slipped away, and the gallery continued to buzz with support, each artist sharing personal stories of challenges they faced against critics. The atmosphere transformed, bringing an unshakable sense of solidarity. Tanya discussed her work with others, weaving in the themes she had aimed to capture: freedom, pain, and transformation. But as the night settled, a shadow lingered in the back of her mind. What if Susan returned even angrier? What if her words stung deeper next time? Mark seemed to sense her unease, stepping beside her. "Don't allow fear to shape your journey," he said gently. "The art world thrives on diversity. You've earned your place here tonight, and your voice matters." His words wrapped around Tanya like a warm blanket, pushing her worries aside. She was valid, she was enough. As the festivities wore on, Tanya felt more at home than ever. Conversations flowed like warm honey, wrapping around her heart. Instead of an enemy, she found a vibrant community ready to support one another. As the clock wound down, Tanya glanced at her beloved painting once again. It was alive with color, testament to her essence and growth. She had fought for her art, and that night felt sanctified. With each moment, the warmth solidified a newfound sense of belonging. She knew that creativity wasn't just a solitary pursuit, it thrived in collaboration and connection. As the last guests trickled out and the gallery dimmed, Tanya took a moment to breathe in the atmosphere, the lingering echoes of applause and laughter, the sense of paint and promise. Tonight had marked a turning point in her life, a moment when she realized her voice would never be silenced again. Susan had threatened her, but Tanya had stood her ground and emerged victorious. Walking out of the gallery, Tanya felt a rush of confidence. The art world was vast and unpredictable, but she was ready to take it on. She had learned that true art stemmed from vulnerability, that each brushstroke told a story worth sharing. "Here's to the next chapter," she whispered to herself, stepping into the night, feeling the cool air invigorating her spirit. The world awaited, and she was ready to embrace every challenge with an open heart, each voice adding to the symphony of creativity she sought to create. And with each heartbeat, she knew she could face anything. The journey was just beginning, and she would let her art thrive without fear of judgment. She would continue to break free, not just for herself, but for every artist who feared their voice would be drowned out. This was only the beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it all would lead her next. The moment Tanya stepped into the gallery, the energy hit her like a wave. Bright lights illuminated the space, revealing artwork in every corner. Vibrant colors danced in front of her eyes, each piece a world of its own. But somewhere in that bubbling excitement lay an undercurrent of anxiety. Tonight was her moment. Her painting was front and center, a bold expression of her journey through pain and empowerment. But then she spotted her. Susan stood near the entrance, a glass of wine in hand, exuding an air of superiority that sent chills down Tanya's spine. The infamous art critic was known for her sharp tongue and ruthless critiques. Tanya's heart sank. Art meant so much to her. It was her voice, her release. But here was Susan, ready to dissect it with just a few biting words. Tanya glanced around the crowded room, searching for familiar faces. She spotted her friend Michelle, who gave her a reassuring nod. Yet even that couldn't quell the fear gnawing at her heart. What if Susan panned her work? What if the very criticism that could dismantle her dreams came crashing down tonight? Michelle asked as she approached Tanya. "Your piece is amazing." Taking a deep breath, Tanya steeled herself. "You're right, I can do this," she said, feigning confidence. But the tightness in her stomach refused to let go. As the evening progressed, Tanya watched Susan move through the crowd, her gaze like a hawk searching for prey. It felt like every conversation turned into a delicate dance, with guests aware of her presence, tips in their voices when they resumed talking about art. Finally, Susan made her way toward Tanya's painting. Tanya's heart raced as she followed, compelled by a mixture of dread and curiosity. Susan purred, her eyes narrowing as they swept over the canvas. Swallowing hard, Tanya nodded, her voice wavering slightly. "Yes, I created it." Struggles. Susan's grin widened, but it was more mockery than applause. Throwing paint onto a piece of canvas doesn't quite encapsulate a journey, does it? Tanya felt the words land like daggers. The laughter snickered around her, and she could sense the crowd prying into the conflict like it was a simmering pot about to boil over. "It's not just a mess," Tanya said, surprised by the steadiness creeping into her voice. "Art is a reflection of our feelings." "Chaotic, surely you jest. Maybe art should have some standards," Susan shot back, her tone biting. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the tension thickening, palpable, stifling. Tanya felt her breath hitch. She managed to ask, her voice steadying, "This piece represents me, my fears, my hopes, and my freedom." Susan's eyes flashed, an icy demeanor hardening as she prepared to retort, but in that moment a familiar voice sliced through the thick air. Mark, the director of the gallery, appeared with an aura of calm assurance. Tanya felt the initial weight of anxiety start to lift. Mark was known for being fair and supportive, a sanctuary for artists like her. "Yes," Susan replied, keeping her voice deceptively smooth. Tanya felt Mark's gaze searching for her, giving her strength. "This gallery exists to celebrate creativity, not discourage it," he said, his voice firm. The shift in the crowd was palpable. Tanya squared her shoulders, feeling a surge of confidence. "It's about breaking free from the pain that once defined me. I poured every ounce of my heart into this work." Mark nodded, clearly impressed. "Exactly, art is about connection. It explores feelings, both beautiful and painful." Susan's expression darkened, her veneer of composure starting to crack. "Connection," she sneered, looking increasingly agitated. Tanya asked, her voice rising with fervor. "You may have the power to critique, but to belittle artists does nothing to elevate the conversation." The crowd shifted, whispers of support filling the room. Susan's confidence wavered as she realized the tide was turning against her. "Don't forget, I can easily crush careers with a review," she shot back, her voice sharp with brittle fury. "Reviews are just opinions, Susan," Mark replied, unfazed. "But the truth is this, art speaks to each person differently." Tanya felt the applause building, a wave of momentum carrying her forward. She felt uplifted, emboldened. Art is about authenticity and vulnerability. Susan's expression hardened further, her irritation palpable. "I'll make sure you regret standing up to me," she hissed, her composure slipping. "Maybe it's time for change," Tanya replied, her voice resolute. "If you can't see the value in vulnerable expression, it's really your understanding that needs to change." With that, the crowd erupted into applause once more. Tanya felt a cascading wave of relief and triumph wash over her. Susan had underestimated the power of a shared experience, and the atmosphere in the gallery felt electrified. Mark said, beaming, "Tonight demonstrates the importance of diverse voices." The tension that had charged the room moments before transformed into something powerful, a community of artists standing together. As Susan realized she was losing the battle, she crossed her arms tighter, a fuming expression on her face. "You've made a mistake tonight, Tanya. You'll regret this confrontation," she said, her voice dangerously low. And just like that, she spun on her heels and stormed toward the exit, leaving behind the bubbling crowd that now hummed with exhilaration. The applause rang louder, an affirmation that vibrated through the space. Tanya stood there, heart racing, caught between disbelief and triumph. "You did it," Michelle exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. "I just felt like I had to," Tanya replied, a mix of elation and disbelief flooding through her. Mark approached her, pride etched across his face. "What you displayed tonight was more than just art, it was courage." As the gallery buzzed with laughter and camaraderie, Tanya reveled in the shared energy that surrounded her. Artists mingled, shared stories, and laughed. The tension from earlier vanished, replaced with solidarity and empowerment. Yet even amid the celebration, Tanya couldn't shake the shadow cast by Susan's words. The threat still loomed, nagging at her conscience. Would Susan retaliate? Would she smear her name across the art world? As if reading her thoughts, Mark leaned closer. "Don't let fear take hold," he said softly. "You have a community that stands with you." Tanya nodded, grateful for the reassurance. The support around her was palpable, a sanctuary of shared vulnerability and artistic expression. As the evening wore on, conversations bubbled with enthusiasm, with artists trading their stories of overcoming obstacles and fears. Tanya felt an undeniable bond forming. Here she was not just an artist, she was part of a movement, an exploration of truth. Hours slipped away, and as the crowd thinned, Tanya felt a sense of completion. She stepped back to review her painting one last time. It radiated a newfound energy, colors shimmering against the soft gallery lights. "I did this," she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of pride swell in her chest. But as a final wave of guests departed, Tanya sensed a shift in the air. She couldn't shake the thought of Susan's promise, her solemn vow that she would make Tanya regret this night's confrontation. Just then, the gallery door swung open and a chill swept through the room. A figure appeared in the doorway, Susan, with an unreadable look in her eyes. It wasn't just a passing glance. She stood there, an ominous presence, as the door creaked behind her and the tension returned in waves. The electrified atmosphere stilled, all eyes on Susan, who now held a larger-than-life envelope in her hand. Tanya's heart raced, realizing this moment could change everything once again. What would Susan do? The thrill of victory hung in the air, but the storm was back. The gallery was quiet, a palpable uncertainty taking hold as Susan stepped forward, determination etched in her sharp features. And with one single action, she tore open the envelope. Someone whispered, and that whisper echoed like thunder. The truth of the night hung precariously in the balance, a cliffhanger of emotions swelling as they awaited her next words, knowing that only time would reveal the outcome. What would happen next? The stakes had never felt higher, and the night was far from over.